You're watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
Hey folks, it's Sara Civian on the Toronto Sports Rush channel, part of the Bet Rivers Network. Today we're talking all things Leafs and NHL with esteemed contributor to the channel, NHL Network staple, and all-around legend, EJ Hradek. EJ,
Wow.
How you doing these days?
Well, after that introduction, I'm doing really good. Thank you so much. I don't know how esteemed I really am, but thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's good to be with you, Sarah.
How you doing these days? Where in the world are you?
I'm just in my home state of New Jersey, but I'm staying up here by our office in Secaucus. I was at Madison Square Garden last night for the Sharks and the Rangers. I wanted to check in on Celebrini and Smith with the Sharks, and also take another look at the Rangers. I saw them against Winnipeg on Tuesday night, and it's kind of like a lot of these teams now. There's just been a lot of games, and it's been kind of an up and down start to the season for almost everybody, I guess, except Winnipeg, and even they lost on Thursday night, right? So I wanted to check in on them again. But Celebrini looked really good. He obviously missed some time with injury, but he looks fine, and it'll be interesting to see how the rest of the season unfolds for
Yeah,
him.
it's been a little wonky in my opinion with the games. There's so much variance. It feels like the Devils have played so many games and you're like, all right, they're on the top of the Metro, but at the same time, teams are playing better than them, I'd say. So it's an interesting spot right now, but 1 month in, we're kind of getting the vibes.
Yeah, it's funny because watching the game, I've been to a couple Ranger games at the Garden this year, and I've seen the Devils a couple of times, and the thing that strikes me about these first 6 weeks is it's really loose hockey. I mean, there's not a lot of defensive intensity, and I guess we could expect that because it is early in the season. But I don't see a lot of that right now. I think obviously that changes as we get further along and we get to the playoffs. So that'll be one thing that'll be different down the road. But it just seems like a lot of loose hockey right now. And there's a lot of teams that are kind of around 500 and kind of struggling to find their way. So I think if you're getting points right now and you're finding ways to win games, no matter how you do it, I would say you probably should be pretty happy.
Yeah, you got to stockpile those points right now, especially in the Atlantic. You look around and it's like half the teams are at 500.
Yeah.
But speaking of the
it's screwy. It's screwy.
It really is. But speaking of the Atlantic, I think the Leafs have looked pretty good so far this season, and I know you the rest of the hockey world have had your eye on the Leafs. So before we get into the specifics, can you give me one reason you think from the beginning of this season you think they'll make it past the first round? One reason they won't?
Well, one reason I think they would do it is because I just think they're a little tougher a group on the whole. I just think they're a little harder to play against right now, and I think they've been trending that way over the last 18 months or so. And they made some nice additions. I mean, Tanev is one of those guys that as you get to the playoffs and I get to that defensive intensity, I mean, he's one of those guys that'll help you. I just think that Craig Berube is trying to instill more of a hard to play against part of their team. So I think that's one reason they would do well and make it past, the first round and maybe make it into the further along in the playoffs. On the negative side, I guess the goaltending in big spots is untested, really, when you think about it. I mean, as much as I really like Anthony Stolarz, a native of the great state of New Jersey,
Let's go.
as much as I like Anthony, I mean, and he's playing great right now. He's at a .930 save percentage. He hasn't had to be the guy in the playoffs. Joseph Woll is back from injury, but we saw last year, right, Sarah? Joseph Woll playing good. He's going to help them win, and he's not available for Game 7 due to injury. So, that would be a reason to say, hey, it's not going to go so well. The goaltending is really unproven in those moments.
Yeah. Speaking of the goaltending, do you think Woll, it's just a matter of getting warmed back up from injury? I mean, I've seen him stop really hard shots that maybe he shouldn't have been able to, but at the same time, he's had a lot of trouble with the point shots and kind of letting goals in with minutes left in the period. So
that's a negative.
Yeah,
that's a negative. For goalies, letting goals in at any time is a negative, but those are certainly late in the period are not good. I think that Joseph Woll, the key again is he's got to stay healthy and be available. And I think they need both these guys. Again, I love the way Stolarz has played. I think I talked about it a couple of weeks ago, talking to Stolarz last year when he was with the Panthers. being around Bobrovsky, he said, he learned so much about, just preparation and being a pro from watching Sergey. And I think, Anthony played really well last year for Florida, and he's kind of played very well so far for the Leafs this year. So, I think he's going to be fine, but I don't think he's a guy that you want to play 55 games, right? So I think Joseph Woll is going to have to be available and playing well. I think it's going to be both those guys, if they stay healthy, kind of back and forth a lot this year. And then I think Craig Berube will probably make a decision when it comes to the playoffs as who does he feel is the hot guy at that moment. And it might bounce back and forth in the playoffs. I wouldn't be surprised at that at all. But, Wall's just got to be healthy and available. If he's that, I'm confident that he'll play well.
Speaking of Berube, there's a lot of talk, which I agree with, that he has that hard-nosed way about him, but it's actually inspiring to players, and players love playing for him. What do you think a coach like that does to kind of get that reputation?
Well, in Craig's case, play like a million games and get into a million fights and just be a tough son of a gun, right? That like when you see Craig Berube, you're like, whoa. I mean, he was a tough cookie as a player. I think he kind of commands respect that way. These guys who play for him now may not know anything about his playing career and the way he played, but it's pretty easy to see he's a guy it's kind of a straightforward guy, a straight shooter. But I think, Sarah, with all these coaches, I mean, they run their course, right? I mean, he's new in Toronto there. When he went into St. Louis, right, he took over a team that was really struggling. Things kind of all came together for him. Jordan Binnington kind of arrived on the scene. Really, they had no other choice. I mean, they had goalies injured. Jake Allen was injured. Ville Husso was in their system. He was not healthy. Binnington came in, he played, and the best thing Craig Berube did was he just kept playing him. He never went back to anyone else. He just kept playing him, and Binnington played very well, and they went on to win the Cup. But over time, things changed, and Craig ended up losing that job, and now he's in Toronto, and he's trying to kind of establish a culture there. And I think that, he's doing a pretty good job of it thus far. He's got the backing of management, obviously, so you always want to have that. But, it's on the players. You have to have the players. And, they've made some changes to their roster. They're getting good performance so far this season out of Marner, Nylander, Tavares. Matthews has been hurt. But, it's really going to be on those players to get the job done. It'll be up to Craig to try to, again, kind of change that culture a little bit, or make that culture a little bit more about, again, being hard to play against, about doing the right things in big moments, about defensive intensity when it matters, and about finding ways to win big games at big moments. So far, I think he's doing a good job. He's on the right track, but, we got a long way to go.
Yeah, indeed. What do you think is the most important thing we've learned about the team as a whole in the wake of the Matthews injury?
Well, I mean, I think that they're resilient. I mean, they're hanging in there. I mean, like when you have an injury to a guy like Auston Matthews, one of your top players, in the short term, it seems like you can get by, and that's kind of what the Leafs are doing. Their power play just took off when Matthews got hurt. I mean, it was just there's really no real explanation for that, right? I mean, like Auston Matthews is one of the great goal scorers in the league. I mean, we've seen what he can do. Him leaving your power play unit should not be the spark to take off and score on 50% of your power plays. But, sometimes just a little bit of a change in the mix in short term. Guys are maybe not deferring and shooting more and not trying to force the puck to Matthews. So maybe that changes it. So in the short term, you get by. So they've been resilient without him. But I do think if this stretches out and it becomes a longer stretch of time when he's out of the lineup, I mean, you're going to see that it's going to be harder and harder for those guys to do that. The schedule does get better for them. They've got this stretch where they have a 3-game homestand that takes place. The games themselves take place over 9 days, but there's basically like 13 days between the last game they played on Wednesday night against the Capitals and the beginning of their next road game, which is, I think, right before Thanksgiving. So this is a really good stretch, hopefully, for them to kind of reevaluate themselves a little bit, have a little more rest, and for Auston Matthews, hopefully, to get back in the lineup. He's not really skating right now, but being that they only play these 3 games in the next 10, 12 days, it's some time for him to kind of hopefully get back on track and get back in the lineup.
Yeah, this schedule has really allowed us to test our rest versus rust theories this season. I know it worked out for the Lightning, right? I mean, a week off, you come back and you beat the Jets. I mean, that in-season rest, I guess, is really helpful. So we'll see. And you're right about Matthews for sure.
Yeah. It's it's just like I said, it's one of those quirks to see a guy leave the team as one of the great goal scorers, and the power play just takes off like they've just been on fire with the extra man. So we'll see where it goes. But this is a weird schedule because they've played a lot of games, and now all of a sudden it's all at home too. Edmonton on Saturday, and then they play Vegas the Wednesday, and then they don't play again until the Sunday, the 24th, I think it is, against Utah. So 3 home games over that many days. It's a good time to kind of, for the guys who are banged up a little bit, to recover, and for the guys that, and for the coaching staff really to work on some things in practice, because you don't get that all the time during the season.
Yeah, for the goalie rotation too. You get to see more of maybe Woll and Stolarz and maybe secret third thing. I mean, who knows where
who
that's
knows?
going.
Who knows, Sarah? You never know. I don't know if teams ever like to go and get that secret third thing. They like having those 2 guys that they know.
Yeah.
Nobody likes to open that box because who knows what's jumping out of that box sometimes.
And people always say, like, if you have 2 good goalies, you have no good ones. But I think the case is really different here. I mean, they're both above 900. Yeah. They both got, Stolarz has had 11 starts. Woll has had 5. And it's kind of a unique situation where you're kind of really having the luxury of feeling out, and the team is doing well throughout this. So it really is like, I don't know. I mean, why not just see what you really have in these 2 if it's working for now?
You know what, Sarah? The old days, like, and I was growing up watching games like it was one goalie, right? Like that was it, and your backup didn't play that much, for the most part. I think nowadays, especially in the last several years, you're seeing more of these things where guys are playing, almost 40-40 splits. I think ideally if Woll had been healthy, maybe that would have been the way to go for the Leafs. I think you're seeing it in Washington with the way they're doing things with Lindgren and Thompson right now. They've been back and forth. And, I think that's just the nature of it now. I mean, that's my worry about the Jets is Hellebuyck plays. He played 60 games last year. This year he's been playing a lot. He's going to play for Team USA at the Four Nations. I mean, they gave him that night off on Thursday night against Tampa, and I think that is something that Scott O'Neill and the Jets are going to have to figure out with Hellebuyck, is that I just don't think it makes sense for him to be playing 60 games this year for the Jets when he's going to be playing for Team USA most likely at the Four Nations. They've got to find a way to have fewer games for him, more games for Eric Comrie, and I think for Toronto it could be a strength. I mean, Stolarz has been really good. And Joseph Woll's got the ability, if he's healthy, if those guys if they can stay healthy and playing, I think it gives Craig Berube an opportunity to play both guys throughout most of the season.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to watch the Bruins this season after Swayman and Ullmark, who are both 2 elite goalies, but Ullmark is doing fine, but Swayman's struggling a little bit in net right now without him. And it's like that tandem was holding the Bruins together clearly. Now they're really trying to figure out an identity, and it's like, having 2 really strong goalies seems to be the new way to go. Unless you got a Vasilevsky or Bobrovsky.
Yeah, there's not as many of those guys. And, it's funny with Swayman. You signed a big contract and you had all that hubbub about, like, it went down to the last minute. And, the team is not playing well in front of him, but he's struggled as well. So, it's nice to have that other option. And, every year is a little different. Chuck Fletcher once told me about goalies. He said they're a little like pitchers. One year they're 15-6, and then the next year they're 9-12. So goalies do. There's the very few, the elite guys, the Vasilevskys, the Shesterkins, the Hellebucks that are kind of year after year after year are really good, and maybe we take them for granted. But there's a lot of good goalies in this league that are just goalies that some years are better than others, and you're hoping that when that you get that guy, if he's on your team, playing well in that particular season.
Yeah, and you got to kind of, I don't know, I like the 2 goalie rotation. I do think it it makes me more calm, because I'm like, all right, you can try the other guy if it all doesn't work out, and you don't have to pay anybody too much. But at the same time, now goalies are kind of demanding that respect with the market, and with Shesterkin. Look at him betting on himself, and now it absolutely is going to pay off for him.
Yeah, he's getting paid. There's no question about it. He's had a 1 or 2 bumps this year, but the Rangers give up a lot of chances, and they lean on their goalie a lot. And Shesterkin has been very good. He's going to get his 11.5, whatever it comes down to. That's just a matter of time. And my advice to the Rangers would be, you might as well pay him now, because it seems like every day that you wait in pro sports, as long as I've been around, is the price goes up. So, we'll see what happens there, but I assume he's going to get paid, and paid very well.
Absolutely. I kind of wanted to ask you about Tavares because I know he had that game winner the
Yeah.
other night and he's been strong on the score sheet, but also he's been driving a lot of play. And it's
Yeah.
kind of obviously it's John Tavares. That's what you'd pay him for, right? But he's been a little bit in the background the past few seasons. But this year he's really, really stepped up. And I wonder if it's the pressure off with not being the captain anymore. I like how much should we read into that?
Well, I don't know if there's anything because whether he has a letter or not, he's been a leader this year, right? And they needed him to do that with Matthews out of the lineup. They needed to pick it up, and he really has. It might just be the situation. I mean, he's in the final year of the contract, right? Trying to figure out what's going to be next for him. Guys, in that circumstance, I mean, he would probably. I mean, he went to Toronto. I think he'd probably love to stay in Toronto, right? But the question is, I mean, are they interested in keeping him? What's the price? And if he's not going to be back in Toronto, where is he going to go? And I think, like anybody, you're playing for a contract. That's where he's at right now. I think he's always been a pro, but I think that dials things up a little bit. And the fact that, I was always a believer that Matthew should have been the captain, like early on, because we've seen Sarah, right? McDavid and, Matthews' peers, these guys who are high-end players. For the most part, they become captains of their team. And Matthews was not that for a long time, and now he's the captain this year. But still, for Tavares, that C was on his jersey, and now it's not there anymore. So he can say all the right things, but I think all of us as human beings, that's a little bit of a motivator just to kind of, hey, I'm going to keep doing my thing. I'm going to keep trying to lead, and maybe I'm going to maybe work even a little harder. So I think all those things combined. You got a new coach. You're trying to impress. You're trying to be a force and to be a leader still in this team. Your contract is expiring. Your future is uncertain. Maybe you just say to yourself, hey, I'm going to do the work. I'm going to work harder than I ever worked before, and I'm going to be really a big part of this team because I want to stay here and I want to show these guys they should keep me. So, these are things that, hard to quantify. But the bottom line is he's playing really well right now. He's always been a really good and dangerous player in overtime. I think he's got the fourth most overtime goals since they went to overtime back, after the work stoppage. So he's playing well right now, and they need it. So they got to hope he can continue to do it all year.
Yeah, there's always so much respect for him as a player and a person, but kind of that transition of power just reminded me of how awesome of a guy he is. I don't know, like his kids wearing the Matthews C jerseys and just kind of everything he said about it. I was cracking my silly little jokes about it, but I kind of stopped after that. I was like, you know what? This man deserves my respect.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. So, hey, listen, he's been a really good pro and obviously a high-end player. And, it's good to see him playing well right now. But, that's the thing. There's a lot of uncertainty, I would imagine, in his life right now. And he's probably trying to focus on just the things that he can control. And so far,
aren't we all? Speaking of
yes.
Speaking of the uncertainty, I kind of wanted to zoom out a little bit about the Atlantic and the East. Just kind of like, what's your impression of the playoff field this year? Where do you think the Leafs fit in?
Well, I think they fit in kind of where they have fit in the past. And I mean, that division, it seems like it's one of those divisions. I watch it every year. When is the tipping point? When are Ottawa and Buffalo going to kind of start to rise, or maybe Detroit? Montreal, I think, is still a little further away. But, once again, Ottawa last night, they totally outplay Philly and they lose in overtime. And, not a great goal for Linus Ullmark to give up from almost the goal line from Michkov. So good for the young kid to get the overtime game winner. But, so that's a lost point for the Ottawa Senators. The Buffalo Sabres, they did win in overtime last night, but they blew a game against Montreal on Monday afternoon. So, for the Toronto Maple Leafs, I think they still kind of fit into that upper half of the division with Florida and Tampa. And, Boston is teetering. And Boston is one good game, one bad game, one good game, one bad game. There's a lot of, as you know, Sarah, you're right up there. I mean, there's just a lot of noise around that team right now. But I think the Toronto Maple Leafs, kind of fit into that, 2-3 spot. I don't know if they're going to be good enough to win the division. It'd be great if they could, because it would set up a better path for them most likely. But, the path that you get is the path you get. You got to find a way to win. You got to be healthy at the right time. But I think they're kind of in that same window. And the fact that the Bruins are struggling and having problems, that's only good news for the Toronto Maple Leafs, because we know the history there. Leafs had a really good performance against the Bruins a couple of weeks ago. So I think they're still, kind of in that same spot. but it's just we're so far off. The season is such a long season, and we got a long way to go. But I've liked it from the start, and I said it early on in different conversations, on our spot here. Is I just think for me the Leafs are more contender than pretender than they have ever been for me. In years past, when they've had really good years, I just never thought they were a team that was going to win in the postseason. This year, I think they've trended more towards that. We'll see how things play out.
Yeah, I think there's like a notion sometimes of just playing the game the right way. I think Berube has been great, and it's just kind of doing the hard things, taking the hard way, beating the Bruins in the regular season.
Yeah, stopping and starting sometimes. It's as simple sometimes as stopping and starting and not swooping around the different zones, but we got a ways to go, like I said.
Yeah, and like you said, the upcoming slate against some of those Western teams, I think, will be super telling. Well, super telling, will it? Who knows? But I think...
Yeah. Well, you got McDavid coming into town on Saturday. That'll be a big story. I mean, he just hit 1,000 points. Was he the fourth fastest to 1,000 points? I believe it was Gretzky, Lemieux, Bossy, and now McDavid. So that'll be big news in Toronto. McDavid coming back to his home area, and Draisaitl and company. It's just too bad Matthews isn't in the lineup. I mean, that's always kind of one of those games, particularly up in Canada. Matthews versus McDavid is a big deal.
100%. All right, EJ, thank you so much for your time.
All right, Sarah. It's good talking to you.
Always. I'm glad we're doing this together.
All right. We're in this together.
We are. This Leafs journey.
See ya.
Thanks for watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.